Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and
If you
kneel down and beg,
onto the
I might
show.
consider letting you off, or else. Or else? Asked Lin Li. He looked at Stephen and lifted his foot before stepping on him with full force. Stephen shrieked. Apart from being a mage, Lin Li was a real guru in blacksmithing. His deep experience from smithing gave him great body strength. If his strength was considered outstanding amongst the warriors, the force he placed in his leg was as if a huge boulder had landed on Stephen's chest. The critical thing was that the boulder did not only fall once onto Stephen. Before Stephen could catch his breath, Lin Li gave him another blow with his leg. What followed was the third and the fourth one. To Stephen, this might be the darkest time of his life. How could the heir of the Dark Blade, the son of a legendary powerhouse, and the most talented mage of the breezy plains, be stepped on like mud? Despite having the determination to fight back, Stephen was not sure why he could not channel the mighty mental strength he had prided himself on. It was as if the strength had gone into hibernation. It couldn't take effect, no matter how hard Stephen tried to awaken it. There was no other thing more terrifying than this. The mental strength was everything to a mage. Without the support of one's mental strength, a mage would be more useless than a farmer who had lost his hoe. Stephen was very shocked by such a blow. The arrogant and vengeful gaze in his eyes disappeared. Instead, it was replaced by fear and confusion. He had always been priding himself on his strong background and powerful abilities. When his background and powers failed to instill fear in his opponent, his arrogance would naturally be extinguished. Although he had his teeth tightly clenched together, the fear and confusion grew within his eyes. At last, underlying his gaze, was a hint of plea. Unfortunately, Lin Li had no mood to entertain Stephen's thoughts. To Lin Li, since he had already offended the Dark Blade, he should just take the chance to vent all his unhappiness. Otherwise, he would regret this moment when the three legendary individuals started to hunt him down. That convinced Lin Li to make use of the Lord of Nightmares. The combined ability of a level 19 Lord of Nightmares and a level 19 Archmage was extremely close to the legendary realm. It was not impossible to lock the mental strength of a level 17 Archmage. At that moment, the wooden house became very silent. Stephen fainted 4 times from all the humiliation and suffering. He helplessly fainted again and again every time he woke up. It was like a nightmare. Even Hutton, who was supposed to be Stephen's enemy, started to sympathize with him after seeing his misery. Of course, other than sympathy, there was delight. Hutton was proud of his decision to introduce them to each other. Senior Adelo had been right. President Felix was a scary man that no one would dare to offend. Once an enmity had been established with him, one had to take all precautions to prevent him from taking revenge. He was like a venomous snake hiding in the grass. He would not have anything against you on normal days, but would go for your throat when you let your guard down. On top of that, this venomous snake was a little too strong. While Stephen was still thinking that Lin Li had defeated him because he made use of a magical weapon, Hutton, who was viewing the confrontation from the side as a third party, held a different view. Yes, there was the use of magical equipment. There was, however, true ability as well. The mental strength of President Felix had reached a terrifying extent. Hutton could sense the pressure of the magical waves even though he stood many meters away from them. He could feel resistance when was trying to channel his mana. The only thing that would result in this would only be the suppression of mental strength. That being said, it would not be the usual mental suppression. As long as someone had twice the amount of mental strength compared to the others, it would create a difficulty for the others to activate their mana. Thank goodness. Hutton wiped off his cold sweat discreetly. It did not matter if Felix was a man with great power. The fact that he was a daredevil caused him to negate Master Borg's existence. Although Stephen was Master Borg's son, Lin Li gave him over 10 kicks. No one would know if Stephen would still have the guts to leave home in the future. "Alright, little mage," said Tutankhamun, breaking his silence when Stephen fainted for the 5th time. "Hold on first, I haven't finished my piece." "Sure," replied Lin Li as he gave Stephen one last kick. The pain woke Stephen up again. After giving him that last blow, Lin Li wiped his sweat off the forehead. He smiled in satisfaction and went back to the table. Hutton, go and help that unlucky fella over. All right. After 30 minutes, the 3 young mages and the black dragon went back to sit around the wooden table. However, everyone looked greatly different as compared to before. Stephen had a trace of blood at the corner of his lips, and his long robe was very messy. He was in a daze when he went back to the table. His gaze was soulless, and no one knew what was on his mind. Hutton's expression was as usual. Although he still had occasional conversations with Lin Li, his body was always slanted in another direction. It was as if he was trying to keep a distance from Lin Li subconsciously. All right, now that you have seen all of Jesco's relics, I will adhere to the promise made 1,300 years ago and give them to one of you. However, I must remind you that Jesco said this is a transaction. In other words, if you want to receive these relics, you have to help him with something. What is it? It was something Jesco wanted but didn't have the chance to do, said Tutankhamun as he proceeded to recite something in the ancient dragon language. The spell was not very long. When it reached only 4 to 5 syllables, a dazzling ray of bright light shone out. The trees, grass, and flowers within the light constructed a scene that resembled a dense forest. Spacetime beacon spell. The 3 young mages were all well versed in magic. They were not unfamiliar with the spell Tutankhamun cast. The spacetime beacon spell was a level 20 legendary spell that allowed mages to leave their own markings in both time and space. After that, they would be able to replay the situation that happened there as and when they wished to, like in a novel. Oh damn, that's the Sunset Mountains. Lin Li exclaimed after the scene before him grew clearer. That was right, the scene that appeared from the spacetime beacon spell was the Sunset Mountains Lin Li was extremely familiar with. Lin Li had lived in the Sunset Mountains for 2 months when he first entered Emerald World. Having battled different monsters every day, he was incredibly clear with the environment in the Sunset Mountains. When he saw the forest projected from the spacetime beacon spell, he immediately recalled that that was the peak of one of the mountains, a region that many level 15 magical beasts roamed. Lin Li remembered very clearly that that was the region Anduin did not permit him to enter due to the presence of dangerous beasts. It wasn't until Lin Li managed to use the nightmare seed he found at the borders of the forest to produce some bottles of water spirit potion that it tempted Anduin to bring him there. Because of that, Lin Li got the chance to witness the greatness of a legendary realm mage. Those level 15 beasts that he could not defeat then became as insignificant as ants. It did not matter whether there was 1, 10, or 100 beasts. Anduin managed to turn them into ashes instantaneously with just a few fire spells. To the Lin Li then, that was absolutely out of the world. Hence, the forest had left a deep impression on Lin Li. That's right. It's the Sunset Mountains, Tutankhamun said in low voice while he controlled the spell. However, it was the Sunset Mountains 300 years ago. Tutankhamun's words were followed by a shift in the scene as projected by the spacetime beacon spell. Booming steps could be heard from that forest, and their volume was increasing exponentially as though it was just beside their ears. There were noises from booming footsteps, growls of beasts, and shrieks of the wind. It was as though the entire forest was trembling. Huge crowds of magical beasts dashed out of the forest in a frenzy. Amongst them there were the 3-eyed demon wolves and wyverns, and Lin Li even saw the shadows of 2 crimson pythons. There were too many magical beasts that were rushing out of the forest. The scene was like a water current that was surging out of the forest. Wait a minute. Current. Lin Li exclaimed. Could this be the black current Anduin was referring to? In reality, Anduin was not the only person who had spoken of the black current. The Archbishop and Los of the Brilliant Shrine mentioned it once during the ceremony when Lin Li was taking over as president. Anduin told Lin Li many things about the black current when he was in the Sunset Mountains. However, Lin Li could not understand the horror of the black current, as he did not experience it firsthand. He could not get why Anduin would want to avoid the mountains temporarily when it happened despite being a legendary realm mage. Now that it was incredibly rare to find people who were in the sanctuary realm, people in the legendary realm were considered the most powerful people in the world. Was there anything they could be afraid of? However, Lin Li understood everything now. The beam of light projected when the space-time beacon spell activated was like a mirror. It reflected everything that happened during the Black Current. The Sunset Mountains, before their eyes, were dark and gloomy. There were not only gray clouds, but also countless flying magical beasts. The scene was a foreboding omen of a storm. There were thunderbirds, dragon hawks, griffins, and wyverns. Countless violent magical beasts spread their wings and swooped to fill the air. They nearly covered the entire sky. Their piercing whistling resembled that of mad winds, just as though doomsday had arrived. Cracks started to appear on the ground, and boiling lava seeped out from within. The trees and the other plants started to catch fire. The vast greenery before them became an orange area where flames surged wildly. Huge groups of magical beasts were fighting one another, causing strong magical waves to growl amidst the fire. It was as if the entire world had turned into a pot of boiling water. It might be tens of thousands, or perhaps hundreds of thousands. Nobody would be able to count the magical beasts present in that scene. Since the space-time beacon spell had its limitations, what they could see in the projection was not the entire Sunset Mountains. The projected image made Lin Li admit that the Black Current was a phenomenon that even legendary powerhouses should avoid. There were far too many magical beasts. The thought of it would give one goosebumps all over his scalp. Hundreds of thousands of ghost sabers could easily appear as a group, and create a lot of trouble for people in the legendary realm. And that was just one of the less threatening groups of animals in the Black Current. There were many stronger and more daunting magical beasts present. If one did not escape with the power of flight immediately, even if he were at the legendary realm, he would be in for great trouble. What a monstrous place! The doomsday-like scene instilled fear in Lin Li. He was thankful for his luck that day. If he had encountered the Black Current, he would have been devoured by all those magical beasts. Just when Lin Li was secretly grateful for his good fortune back then, the scene in the mirror changed abruptly. When the flames surged into the air, there was a gigantic figure that swooped past the sky. Lin Li looked up in shock, only to see that there was a huge beast that flew above all the fire. Damn, that's the four-headed chimera. He was right. It was a four-headed chimera that was flying above the forest. The chimera made frequent appearances in a variety of folklore of Anril, one of which was that during the Dark Age, the High Elves had many chimeras to guard the 7 sky castles. Chimeras were like dragon hawks. They were dragons that inherited the blood of the Wyrm. Yet, they were much more powerful as compared to the dragon hawks. In reality, the chimeras were the only type of dragon in Anril that had an ability that was closest to Wyrms. What they had inherited was the magical force of the Wyrms. Every chimera was born with a pair of wings and a head that were similar to the Wyrms. However, their magical force was still very weak, and they could only cast one type of low-level spell. It would take the chimera a century to grow its second head, and thus become capable of casting another type of spells. Only at that moment would its magic ability be raised to level 5. In that case, the magical force of the chimera was similar to a magic shooter's, but with the wind-like speed it was flying at, and the innately strong resistance to magic, 2 magic shooters wouldn't defeat this double-headed chimera. The third head would make a chimera really invincible, as it would be able to instantaneously cast most spells that were under level 15. Then, it would have the ability to master 3 types of magic and be known as the Overlord of the Air. Having combat energy of at least level 18, 10 three-headed chimeras would be a nightmare for somebody in the legendary realm. The type of chimeras the High Elves used to guard the sky castles was that with 3 heads. However, no one, not even the High Elves, had managed to tame a 4-headed chimera. What was a 4-headed chimera? Every 4-headed chimera would be at least 1,000 years old. It had mastery over 4 types of elemental spells, namely earth, water, fire, and wind. Apart from its inability to create magical domains, its ability to cast spells was comparable to that of a level 20 legendary mage. In an actual battle, a level 20 legendary mage might not even have the ability to fight it. It was fortunate that it was rare to meet a four-headed chimera. There weren't many that appeared in the history of Amril. After the Dark Age, it was commonly perceived that the chimeras had lost the ability to grow their fourth head. Lin Li would not have thought he would see the figure of a four-headed chimera appearing in the black current in the Sunset Mountains. It seemed that the four-headed chimera was gravely injured as well. Although the fast speed with which the four-headed chimera flew made the figure blurry on the projected screen, Lin Li could identify two bright balls of fire that circled the wings of the chimera. He had no idea what caused it to happen. The two balls of fire did not seem to extinguish when the chimera swooped at top speed. In fact, they grew stronger amidst the mad winds. However, this four-headed chimera had a critical wound in one of its head. Yes. The four-headed chimera, that had the ability to use 4 types of elemental magic, had lost one of its heads. Lin Li could see it reflected very clearly on the mirror the spacetime beacon spell created. There was a head that resembled a Wyrm's hanging floppily at the side of its neck. There was fresh purple blood running down its neck as well. The 4 heads of a four-headed chimera did not only take charge of one type of elemental magic each. They affected the ability of a chimera to cast spells. Once it lost one of its heads, the chimera would not only lose the ability to use one type of magic, but also fall from the legendary realm immediately. That was the most critical point. The chimera would strive to protect all of its heads in any battle so as to prevent itself from suffering any critical hits. The inability to protect its head could only mean one thing: its enemy was far stronger than it. Damn, what other magical beasts could be so powerful? Lin Li muttered. He really could not think of any other magical beast with the ability to make the four-headed chimera cut such a sorry figure. However, Lin Li got his answer very quickly. It was not a powerful beast that wounded the chimera. It was a human. To be exact, it was a human mage. When the chimera was soaring above the forest, Lin Li could see a black figure flying out from the woods. If not for a long black robe and the magic staff the figure held in his hands, Lin Li would have thought that it was a magical beast that flew out from the forest. He could not help it. His speed was too fast. He caught up with the four-headed chimera almost immediately, and landed on its back like a black thunderbolt. What followed was hellfire. The hellfire that covered an area of 10 meters square was like a red-hot piece of soldering iron that landed on the back of the four-headed chimera with no apologies. At that instant, there was a thunderous growl that suppressed all the sounds of panic made by the countless magical beasts. It did not stop there. No one knew where that human mage managed to get such an abundant flow of mana, but he did not take an extra breath before he cast the Starfall spell immediately after hellfire. What a pity, Lin Li gasped as he saw brilliant sparkles erupting above the forest. He could not help but sympathize with the beast. To be honest, the four-headed chimera was definitely on the peak of the food chain in the Sunset Mountains. The ability of a level 21 was not to be trifled with. It would even have the chance to defeat 2 legendary mages alone. Unfortunately, the luck of that four-headed chimera was still on the worse end to have encountered such an unreasonable freak. The 2 spells he cast were namely the level 22 Hellfire and the level 23 Starfall. Even Apophis would need to take 30 minutes of rest before he regained his energy to cast the next spell. However, the freak before him cast Starfall immediately after he cast Hellfire without a pause. Yet, there was not a hint of tiredness in his expression. It was as though he did not cast 2 spells that were above level 20, but rather took 2 sips of plain water. One could only blame the four-headed chimera for having such a bad luck to meet a freak like that. Who? Who's that? He is Jesco. It was Tutankhamun who replied to Lin Li. The mention of Jesco made Lin Li take in a mouth of cold breath. After a moment of silence, he spat out one word. Frack. Following the shrieks of the four-headed chimera, the brilliant starlight in the sky had also torn through the dark clouds that blotted out the skies. In an instant, there were countless meteors descending from above, and every meteor was as dazzling as a diamond. When all of the countless meteors were connected, they made for a breathtakingly beautiful spectacle. The level 23 Starfall could definitely be described as one of the hardest spells to execute amongst the legendary realm spells. Even a legendary mage that was just a single step away from the sanctuary realm would not dare to cast it recklessly. It was because the mental strength and mana required to cast this spell were simply too much, so nobody dared to try it casually. Once it failed, the recoil it brought could cause a legendary mage to lose his life. It was also why there were very few legendary mages that dared to demonstrate the level 23 Starfall after 1300 years. However, once this frighteningly hard to execute legendary spell was successful, the force it brought forth was similarly top-notch amongst the legendary spells. It had an area of effect of more than hundreds of meters, making it unique in that regard, and there were no blind spots. Other than hiding underground, there was no way to escape from the magic power of Starfall. If there were any weaknesses of Starfall, it was just that it could not differentiate friend from foe. Those meteors falling from the sky were like a level 8 spell each. Do not look down on a level 8 spell. A single one might not amount to much, but when tens or even hundreds of them bombarded a single target, even an archmage might not be able to handle it. Furthermore, in the hundreds of meters that were the area of effective Starfall, how could it be just tens or hundreds of meteors descending? If anything, it was thousands or tens of thousands. They could not be counted. Once somebody was caught within it, it was impossible not to be struck by those countless meteors. Even legendary mages had no choice but to fear this drawback. After all, legendary mages were not gods. When hundreds or thousands of level 8 spells were bombarding their bodies, they would still be unable to bear the consequences. Of course, this only concerned legendary mages. For people like Jesco, this shortcoming of the Starfall was not an issue. Jesco stood firmly on the back of the four-headed chimera, his black robe flapping in the wind. The star light above his head was glaring, and the flames of the earth below his feet were raging. Countless dazzling meteors descended and caused a plane of shimmering light to surge forth in the sunset mountains. All of this was like a nightmare. There were large numbers of magical beasts dying every second with this Starfall for minutes. As long as they were struck by Starfall, they would immediately be blasted into smithereens by that cataclysmic magical force, no matter if they were flying or landborne. In an instant, shrieks and roars rang out in the sky, while blood seemed to have dyed the whole forest red. Countless wyverns were spewing venom in the surroundings. Large numbers of griffins were running amok. The thunderbirds were calling down thunderbolts, and dragon hawks were spewing raging hot flames. All of these were like a magical storm which instantly engulfed the whole forest, but Jesco, who was in the middle of this storm, did not seem to be concerned. He remained standing firmly on the back of the four-headed chimera, and looked at his surroundings with a gaze so calm that it was unfeeling. It would be easy to notice if one took a closer look, but Jesco was not being left alone. In fact, being in the center of the storm, Jesco was the one suffering the most attacks in the whole forest. The sky full of descending stars and the fervent attacks of the magical beasts were like a giant vortex, swallowing everything in a frenzy. It was just that Jesco, who was in the middle of the vortex, was not affected at all. His position, including the four-headed chimera below his feet, had entirely turned into an illusory shadow. Although it looked like they were still there, when countless spells descended, it did not invoke any ripples. It was as if they landed on a space of nothingness, and passed through it. F***ck, void of the stars. Looking at this abnormal scene, Lin Li could feel his skin crawl. Ever since he came to Amril, Lin Li was already sick of hearing the name of Jesco. This god of mages could be found in almost every single myth, each praising how powerful and terrifying he was. It was only today, however, when he had seen Jesco cast Void of the Stars through the spacetime beacon spell, that Lin Li finally understood that those myths over 1,000 years old were still underrating this god of mages. In today's Amril, there was no longer a single mage that knew what level the Void of the Stars was. Even more so, there was not a single mage that could have a shred of comprehension of this spell. Even a knowledgeable person like Anduin could only find a trace of the Void of the Stars just in myths. Using Anduin's words, it was already a realm that only deities could walk in. Even the high elves that considered themselves deities had not stepped into this realm before. According to myths, mages that could control void of the stars would be able to place their bodies and souls into nothingness. They would no longer suffer damage from swords and spells. Strictly speaking, mages that could control void of the stars no longer belonged to Amrel. They would not be injured by the power of mortals. Once mages reached this realm, there was not much difference between them and true deities. As for the current Jesco, he had undoubtedly reached this realm. Jesco rode on the four-headed chimera and charged to the skies through the forest like a gale. The almost instantaneous starfall was like the Grim Reaper's scythe, mercilessly harvesting the lives of the magical beasts. It looked like the whole world had been devoured by the dazzling starlight. Is this still AF** King Human? Lin Li looked at everything shown by the spacetime beacon spell, and only felt shivers in his limbs. All of this had already transcended the limits of human imagination. Jesco had actually single-handedly massacred tens or hundreds of thousands of magical beasts. This was exactly the same as the legendary Divine Judgment. If I'm not mistaken, when this battle occurred, Jesco was still purely human, but the one that replied to Lin Li was still Tutankhamun. But what? Lin Li's heart tingled when he heard it. Could it be that the legends are true? Nothing, but Tutankhamun did not look like he wanted to continue this topic. He just shook his head. Continue watching, there is something more interesting at the back. More. Lin Li only knew when he lifted his head and watched. Tutankhamun was right indeed. There was something more interesting at the back. After Starfall's harvest, the number of magical beasts outside the forest was halved. As for those flying magical beasts in the sky such as dragon hawks, griffins, and wyverns, they seemed to have noticed the terror of Jesco. At this point, they fought to be the first to escape from the four-headed chimera. What had once been a dark sky now cleared up. After doing all of that, Jesco did not steer the four-headed chimera to leave, but instead floated quietly above the forest. From his patient gaze, it seemed like he was waiting for something. After that, a world-shaking roar was heard. Before Lin Li could understand what was happening, a shadow suddenly flew out of the forest, and struck the four-headed chimera's body heavily. Frack, Lin Li's eyes were wide open. It ought to be known that the four-headed chimera was a powerful level 22 magical beast. It could definitely be said to be in existence at the top of the food chain even during the black current of the Sunset Mountains. However, it actually came crashing down with an attack of this shadow. This is just like an adult fighting a child. With just a slap, the child immediately fell. The speed of this shadow was too fast. It was so quick that the god of mages was almost thrown off his guard. Jesco only cast Void of the Stars again in time when the four-headed chimera had crashed to the ground, causing his body and soul to be placed into nothingness. It was almost at the same time that the three young mages could finally see clearly what was that shadow that attacked the four-headed chimera. After that, the three young mages seemed to have drawn in a breath of cold air simultaneously. Oh my god! Through the lights of the spacetime beacon spell, the three young mages could clearly see that that shadow was not some ferocious magical beast, nor was it some powerful spell. It was something like a tentacle. This was an absolute joke. One had to know that the chimera was flying hundreds of meters in the sky just now, but this tentacle smacked it down from the sky. What did this mean? It meant that this tentacle was at least several hundred meters long. A magical beast's tentacle that was longer than 100 meters? This was already something that could drive people mad. Furthermore, this magical beast could make this tentacle incomparably nimble. It could still easily take down a four-headed chimera from a distance of more than 100 meters. Such a magical beast, even without any spell-casting abilities, was an existence that was definitely scarier than a WYRM. Could it be? After watching till this point, Lin Li suddenly felt shocked. He thought of the story that Anglos had told him. Anglos had once said that during the Black Current on a certain year, a few descendants of prehistoric magical beasts had appeared. These descendants of the prehistoric magical beasts controlled the magical beasts of the Sunset Mountains and started a prolonged massacre. This massacre had shocked the whole Anrel, and even the Supreme Council and Brilliant Shrine sent out their strongest powerhouses. Although they had successfully stopped the black current from spreading, Rosario, who partook in this battle, paid a most painful price. Lin Li suddenly felt that this could be another descendant of the prehistoric magical beasts when he saw that the tentacle striking the four-headed chimera. There was even a chance that it was a prehistoric magical beast itself. It was because the force of that strike was too frightening. A level 22 four-headed chimera did not even have the power to resist that strike. It had been struck down from the skies in an instant. Furthermore, even the strongest ever mage in Anrel, that was called the god of mages, Jesco, could not help but look at that tentacle withdraw into the forest with caution in his eyes. Just when Lin Li was shocked, the forest that had just calmed down started to rumble again. After that, there were countless trees being broken. Parts of the trees, mud, and rocks filled the sky in an instant. It was as though somebody had used an iron plow and plowed through the whole forest. Before Lin Li could comprehend what was happening, more than 10 shadows reached out from the forest and reached out towards the spot where Jesco had landed with a speed that was faster than lightning. The speed of these 10 or so tentacles reaching out had even surpassed the speed that was used to strike the four-headed chimera previously. In just an instant, they had covered a distance of hundreds of meters. At this point, Jesco had just used Void of the Stars, so his body and soul had not completely been placed in the nothingness yet. Even if he did not die once he had been struck by these tentacles, he would be heavily injured. However, the god of mages was still the god of mages. This strongest mage ever had finally demonstrated a casting ability that did not belong to mortals at this point. Boom, 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 boom. Amidst the earth-shattering blasts, more than 10 gigantic ice pillars appeared from the ground. What Jesco summoned were not normal ice pillars. Every pillar here was at least 100 meters tall and required more than 10 people to surround it. When the pillars were erected, they gave off a mythical feeling, just like the giant pillars that the gods used to support the heavenly vault. Those tentacles that reached out of the forest were as fast as lightning. The speed at which Jesco summoned the ice pillars could also make any mage watching it dumbfounded. The speed of both parties was already at the maximum. In just a single breath, both the man and magical beast had already completed their first exchange. The ice pillars covered every angle in an instant. Those tentacles could not dodge them at all. With just a boom, they struck the ice pillars ferociously, and white fog permeated the area in just an instant. Countless ice fragments flew out from the fog with a screeching sound. Although these tentacles could easily strike down a four-headed chimera, they were still made of flesh. When going head-to-head against the sturdy pillars, flesh and blood splattered instantly. After that, a deafening shriek could be heard from the depths of the forest. Countless broken trees flew, and a large meatball floated out with a thunderous sound. Only the meatball's tentacles that were slumping down could be seen. Each one of them was hundreds of meters long, while a singular gigantic eye was emitting a glimmering light in the middle of the meatball. Frack, Evil Eye Tyrant. For most of the adventurers of Anrel, the Evil Eye was probably one of the hardest level 18 magical beasts to deal with. They spent most of their lives living in dark and moist underground areas. For example, the ruins of the High Elves deep underground were usually forcibly occupied by the Evil Eyes and made their nest. Even if these High Elves ruins had been discovered by adventurers, most of them would be marked as restricted areas because it was too dangerous. An Evil Eye itself was a level 18 magical beast, so an average adventurer could not afford to provoke it. Furthermore, they had a damned habit of living in groups. This was the most dangerous part. There would easily be tens or even hundreds of Evil Eyes living together. Once provoked, it was equivalent to poking a hornet's nest. How many adventurers were willing to risk being so unfortunate? Even the likes of Silverhand, a titan known as the strongest mercenary corps in Felon, would not dare to venture into a High Elf's ruins occupied by large numbers of Evil Eyes if they did not manage to hire some high-level priests to hold the line, not to mention average adventurers. There was no helping it. This was no longer a problem that tactics and commands could solve. No matter how well trained or disciplined they were, they could not overcome this absolute difference in power. The strongest weapon of the evil eyes was their tentacles that were tougher than steel and nimbler than fingers. Usually, they would use this 8 tentacles to walk upright. Their speed was like a gale, and they could close up on their target in an instant. After that, these 8 tentacles would strangle their target like 8 pythons. However, if anyone were to be cautious only about their 8 tentacles and forget about that single eye, then they would not be far from demise. A so-called magical beast was a beast that had a talent for using spells. Since the evil eye was a level 18 magical beast, then it naturally would have its own talent and spells. All of the evil eye's magical talents came from its gigantic singular eye. The evil eye could use that eye to shoot out a level 18 spell, Estus Beam. The Estus Beam's temperature could reach up to hundreds of degrees Celsius. It could be said that whatever it went past would leave nothing behind, for even a thick steel armor would be instantly pierced through. Of course, this was not the most powerful ability. The strongest forte of the evil eye was being skilled in mental spells. A mature evil eye that had reached level 18 could easily control the minds of magical beasts that were level 15 and below. Although it was more troublesome for it to deal with humans, human adventurers that were level 10 and below would definitely not be able to resist it. It was especially so when a large wave of tens or hundreds of evil eyes appeared. Large number of mental spells was simply impossible to guard against. Furthermore, it was hard to remain immune to these mental spells unless there was a high-level priest present to provide mental barrier. Otherwise, it would just be a disaster. But, those level 18 evil eyes were no different from ants when compared to this monstrosity in front of their eyes. In legends, the evil eye tyrant was one of the lucky survivors from the prehistoric times. The battle between the dragons and titans had caused the heavens and earth to crumble. But the evil eye tyrant that lived in the underground labyrinth with the minotaurs had escaped from everything with luck. It was only after the calamity that the evil eye tyrant and minotaurs were seen in Amril again. It was just that at that point, it was no longer the dragons or titans, but it was the high elves that had been born from the tree of eternity ruling over Amril. The appearance of the evil eye tyrant and minotaurs had brought forth a full-blown disaster to the high elves. Large numbers of high elves were burnt to ashes by the Estus Beam. If they did not rely on the Tree of Eternity's protection, this race that was destined to create the magnificent magic civilization afterwards could have been wiped out in that disaster. Even the proud high elves could not avoid mentioning this part of history. The records of this disaster could be found in a lot of the literature passed down from that period. It was just that after that disaster, history seemed to have a blank page. People knew that after the battle between the dragons and titans ended, the surviving prehistoric magical beasts almost became the rulers of Amril. They even drove back the high elves that had just been born back to the Tree of Eternity, and almost caused this nearly perfect race to go extinct. Finally, the surviving prehistoric magical beasts and the newly born high elves engaged in a prolonged decisive battle under the Tree of Eternity. After a long period of time, the truth of this battle was buried in the flow of time. Currently, even the most authoritative scholars researching the Dark Age could not accurately tell what had happened during that battle. People only knew that the high elves standing one step from annihilation had actually achieved a miraculous victory. Furthermore, the high elves seemed to have been reborn after the battle. After repelling the prehistoric magical beasts that were besieging the Tree of Eternity, the high elves started to counterattack. Within a short period of 10 years, they exterminated countless prehistoric magical beasts, including the evil eye tyrants and vipers. Even if it was the Herculean minotaurs, they all had been trapped in the underground labyrinth for eternity. With regard to this part of history, there had been no definite answer found in Amril. Even Anduin, who was the most authoritative about high elves, only spoke of this vaguely. Currently, the most authoritative and widely accepted theory was that it was the immortal king that saved the high elves. Even more people felt that it was this unsurpassed powerhouse that single-handedly exterminated the evil eye tyrants and trapped the minotaurs for eternity. It was because based on the chronological order, the time when the prehistoric magical beasts besieged the Tree of Eternity was not far from when the immortal king made his first appearance in Amril. As for what was the truth, only the immortal king himself would know it. However, one thing was certain. In the battle that year, countless prehistoric magical beasts were wiped out. Be it the evil-eye tyrants or the vipers, they had all disappeared after that battle. They were not to be seen in Amril ever again. As for the minotaurs that were forever trapped within the underground labyrinth, occasionally there would be rumors that they had surfaced. But this gigantic creature that appeared in the space-time beacon spell, if it was not an evil-eye tyrant, then what could it be? Lin Li rubbed his eyes, and did not dare to believe what he just saw. What the hell? It was not an illusion. It really was an evil-eye tyrant. Tens of tentacles that were longer than 100 meters, a head that was as large as a mountain peak, and a singular eye that was always radiating an ice-cold glow. All of these were identical to the description of the evil-eye tyrant that was mentioned in myths. F***ck, it really is the evil-eye tyrant. Lin Li immediately drew in a breath of cold air. When he looked at Tutankhamun, his eyes were filled with confusion. Haven't the evil-eye tyrants been exterminated by the High Elves? Why did it appear at the Sunset Mountains during the last years of the Dark Age? I don't know. I did not personally experience what happened back then. The current Tutankhamun seemed especially patient. After answering Lin Li, he seemed to worry that Lin Li would not believe him. He then patiently explained, everything that you are seeing now was recorded by Jesco using the spacetime beacon spell. I am just using the coordinates to replay the situation that happened back then. If you really want to know the truth, I think you have to ask Jesco himself. Just as they were discussing, the battle showed by the spacetime beacon spell became abnormally intense. One was a ferocious prehistoric magical beast, and the other was an unsurpassed god of mages. The battle between the evil-eye tyrant and Jesco was destined to be shocking from the start. The 12 ice pillars that could lift up the vault of heaven did not stop the evil-eye tyrant in its tracks. Almost at the same instant the tentacles crashed into the ice pillars, the singular eye of the evil-eye tyrant also started to shine. This ray of light was the Estus beam that every evil-eye was skilled in. It was just that the same Estus beam would be a totally different spell, depending on whether it was used by an evil-eye tyrant or an evil eye. The evil eye's Estus beam only reached hundreds of degrees temperature, instantly penetrating armor forged from steel. This was already a magnificent result. If it were to encounter magical metals like the eternal adamantine, the metal would not be able to resist it either. But the evil-eye tyrant's Estus beam was completely different. The tens of tentacles pushed down violently, and the head that was as big as a mountain peak was immediately propped up. After that, a ray of light that was brighter than the sun immediately blasted off. In just an instant, it swept past a distance of hundreds of meters. In the next second, there was a loud sizzling sound coming from the forest. Countless trees had been vaporized by the ray of light, and even the ground underneath had been split by a deep new ravine that was hundreds of meters long. Even Jesco, who was called the god of mages, had no choice but to fully focus in the face of such destructive force. Jesco hastily recited incantations, and a rainbow suddenly appeared in the sky. This rainbow was not leaning towards any direction, it was just like a ring that was protecting Jesco steadfastly. After that, there was a deafening boom. The clash between the Estus beam and the rainbow was as if Mars had crashed into Earth. In an instant, the ground rumbled and dazzling lights showered the entire land, while countless flares descended from the skies. That scene was more terrifying than the black current. After the echoes rumbled past, there was a short period of peace. Be it the evil-eye tyrant or Jesco, they both needed some time to understand the aftermath of the clash that had happened just now. Looking from the spacetime beacon spell, the clash just now should not have any victors. The rainbow had negated the Estus beam's attack, but dimmed a few shades at the same time. Powerful. After Lin Li saw this, he could not help but admire it silently. The power of the evil-eye tyrant was indeed not any other magical beast's. Even a sanctuary realm powerhouse like Apophis might not be a match for it. One had to know that that rainbow was most likely Jesco's magical domain. A single attack from the Estus beam had actually been able to damage Jesco's magical domain and make it dim somewhat. Just based on this point, it was already no longer something any magical beast could compare to. No matter how powerful an average magical beast became, it would definitely not be able to damage a legendary mage's magical domain. It was much less so for one facing a monstrous existence like Jesco. At this point, Lin Li even silently guessed that it might even be that Jesco was at a disadvantage in the exchange just now. After all, the Estus beam only expended mana. Although the Isekaied tyrant was not known for having an immense pool of mana, it should not be a problem to fire 100 or so Estus beams. If a magical domain was damaged, on the other hand, it would take a long time to fully recover. It was especially so at Jesco's realm, recovering was exceptionally difficult. The situation proved Lin Li to be right. After the Estus beam was negated by the rainbow, the Isekaied tyrant only took a short pause before it fired off another Estus beam. The most lethal thing was that when the Isekaied tyrant fired off the Estus beam, those tentacles were not idle, either. They attacked Jesco from all sorts of angles. That terrifying power and skill could almost be compared to a level 20 sword sage and above. At this time, Jesco finally demonstrated his magical powers that totally did not belong to humans. With the supportive power of flight, Jesco seemed like a black flash of lightning. He was constantly turning and twisting around those tentacles. He was constantly moving and casting spells. If it was not because Lin Li saw it with his own eyes, he would never believe that there could be a human capable of casting spells while moving at such terrifying speeds on this planet. Furthermore, every single spell could not be any faster. Legendary spells at levels above 20 were completed with just a few casual recitations. There were numerous times when Lin Li felt that Jesco was simply casting low-level magic. When the spells exploded on the Isekaied tyrant's body, demonstrating fearsome power, Lin Li finally could not help but believe that was a legendary spell that could completely drain most mages of their mana. With one Estus beam after another, the battle seemed to have come to a standstill. Be it the Isekaied tyrant or Jesco, they did not show any signs of fatigue. If they were to be judged from their appearance, anybody would think that this was going to be a prolonged battle. However, Lin Li did not think so, because he knew that Jesco's Void of the Stars was about to be completed. Boom! Another Estus beam swept past, leaving a deep crevice in the ground, but this time, Jesco did not use power of flight to dodge it. He just took his time to recite the incantations and summon 12 gigantic ice pillars again. A loud boom was heard, and the 12 ice pillars were instantly blasted into smithereens. But at the same time, Jesco's body had suddenly started to become blurry. Indeed. After going through the arduous exchange, Jesco had finally completed Void of the Stars, and once again caused his body and soul to be placed in nothingness. Indeed, Lin Li knew that Jesco was definitely going to win. The current Jesco was an almost invincible existence. He was no longer vulnerable to magical or physical attacks. He would even not suffer from abnormal statuses like Bite of Mana. Even the control of the magical elements would be at his own free will, following the activation of Void of the Stars. After this Void of the Stars was activated, Jesco's spell-casting methods had completely overturned everything that Lin Li understood about magic. Every time he made a move, it was a spell that was level 20 and above, and they were all almost instantly cast. It was like the elemental sequencing and mana control had all lost their influence on Jesco. There was no need to have time for preparation. Just a wave of his hand, and another legendary spell was blasted off. Even though Lin Li was mentally prepared, when he saw such a monstrous way of casting spells, he still could not help but freeze up. This was definitely not a magical ability that belonged to humans. At this point, Lin Li suddenly felt that the name God of Mages could not be any more appropriate. It was because only a true deity could use such unfathomable way of operating magical power. Jesco's casting speed was terrifying. In less than a minute, he had already used at least 10 legendary spells. The magical elements that were immense enough to destroy the world were mercilessly poured onto the Isekaied tyrant's body. A shred of panic could finally be seen in the Isekaied tyrant's singular eye. Prehistoric magical beasts were not average magical beasts. Their intelligence was above a human's. How could the Isekaied tyrant not know that that human mage was not something it could go against? Be it the steel-like tentacles or the cataclysmic Estus beam, all of its attacking methods seemed like child's play in front of that human mage. Unfortunately, it was too late for regrets now. How could Jesco, who had finally taken the advantageous spot, give the evil-eyed tyrant a chance to retreat? With the cover of Void of the Stars, Jesco seemed to have fused with the magical elements, and destructive legendary spells were summoned and mercilessly poured onto the evil-eyed tyrant one after another. When another hellfire had descended, Lin Li's gaze resting on the evil-eyed tyrant was somewhat filled with sympathy. The god of mages was indeed the god of mages. Even the prehistoric magical beast mentioned in myths could not escape from death and defeat in the face of this unsurpassed magic powerhouse. But, just at the point where everyone thought that Jesco was going to unleash a lethal strike and finish the enemy off, this mage suddenly took out a staff and a book. What is happening? Lin Li immediately froze. Unfortunately, even Tutankhamun could not answer this question. The staff was the Staff of Time, and the book was the Book of Eternity. After these two magical artifacts that were the most famous during the Dark Age were taken out, Jesco's expression became imposing. The god of mages held the Staff of Time in one hand, while the other was holding the Book of Eternity. Countless rainbow-colored magic symbols danced around in the skies like countless rainbow-colored butterflies. Large chunks of incantations were spewed out by Jesco, some were using the human language, and some were in the High Elf's language. Some were even the ancient language of the dragons and the divine language of the titans. The world seemed to have suddenly become silent, and the evil-eyed tyrant's singular eye suddenly showed a look of terror. Jesco silently floated in the sky, fully focused on chanting this incantation that was unfathomably long. When the last incantation had been completed, the magic staff in Jesco's hand suddenly rose up and drew across the sky. Suddenly, the sky was torn apart. After the Staff of Time gently drew past, a long tear suddenly appeared in the sky. It was dark and deep. It was as if the sky had been torn apart. F***ck. After this tear had appeared, there was another round of gasps heard in the hut. At this point, Stephen, Hutton, and Lin Li, these three young mages, seemed to be in a delusion that they were dreaming. These three simply did not dare to believe that Jesco had single-handedly torn apart space and opened a tunnel to the multidimensional space. This was simply too shocking. Even Lin Li had not imagined that the power of magic could reach such a terrifying degree. In just that instance, Jesco definitely used magic powers to tear open space. What seemed like a gentle stroke had completely overturned every single rule of Amrel. Indeed, magic did have the power to operate and overturn rules. A mage could tamper with and even create rules after he had broken through to the legendary realm, obtaining the magical domain. However, the rules here were not some superficial rules. The 8 true core rules of Amrel were a domain that even deities were simply unable to touch. Time and space. Nature and balance. Kindness and light. Evil and dark. These 8 core rules were controlled by Amrel's 4 great dragon aspects. Unless someone had a power that was greater than these 4 great dragon aspects, they would not be able to touch these 8 domains that even deities couldn't easily set foot in. That gentle stroke by Jesco could only mean one thing. The power of this god of mages had already surpassed the 4 great dragon aspects. Roars could be heard from the forest. Every single roar of the evil-eyed tyrant was filled with despair and fear. The tentacles were frantically waving about. All its struggles made it seem like a drowning person trying to grab onto the last straw. In an instant, a scene of flying sand and rolling stones could be seen in the forest. Countless dirt, pebbles, and branches were held by the tentacles of the evil-eyed tyrant and thrown at Jesco like a storm. Unfortunately, Jesco was like an invincible existence under the protection of Void of the Stars. Even a full-on blast by the Estus beam would not be able to leave a scratch on Jesco, not to mention the evil-eyed tyrant's tentacles. The black silhouette peacefully floated in the sky. The dazzling sun rays came down from the top and plated a layer of divine golden hue over the god of mages, while an inexhaustible magical aura started spreading. Jesco held the Book of Eternity in one hand and the Staff of Time in the other. The quiet and gentle incantations were flowing like running water, and every single rune was filled with boundless energy. Every single syllable contained deepest secrets of magic. Jesco's did not have a large body frame, it was rather weak if put in stricter terms. However, looking at the brilliance of the spacetime beacon spell, the current god of mages was like a god that had existed for eternity. The tear in the sky got bigger and bigger, while the struggles of the evil-eyed tyrant got weaker and weaker. Following Jesco lifting up his staff of time again, the evil-eyed tyrant also gave off its final roar of despair. In an instant, the tear in the sky suddenly grew and closed. Then, the whole world became silent. The evil-eyed tyrant disappeared. The magical beasts that were littered all over had disappeared too. Other than Jesco, who was silently floating in the sky, the whole Sunset Mountains had been restored to the former peace. From the cloudless blue sky, golden rays of the sun rained down. After this cataclysmic battle ended, the light from the spacetime beacon spell started to become dimmer. The silhouette of the god of mages also started to blur. With a wave of Tutankhamun's hand, this battle that had happened 1,300 years ago also disappeared like smoke. Look closely, Tutankhamun, just now, was that the tear of space? Hutton was a true genius under a legendary powerhouse. With his experience, how could he not know what was that tear that suddenly tore the sky apart? As to why he would ask this now, it was simply because he did not dare to believe it. He really did not dare to believe it. In fact, if it were any other mage that saw the scene in the spacetime beacon spell, he would also not believe that the power of magic could reach such a terrifying level, not to mention Hutton. That was simply a domain that was directly challenging the gods. A person that harnessed such terrifying power would no longer be immortal. You're right, tear of space. Tutankhamun nodded his head, and signaled the three young mages to take a seat first before he started speaking again. In fact, before this battle began, I also did not believe that Amrel still had a mortal that could single-handedly tear apart space. After taking a seat, Lin Li could not help but ask, then, Mr. Tutankhamun, may I ask, where does that tear of space lead to? That is a good question. Tutankhamun turned around and looked at Lin Li before suddenly smiling. Do you still remember the battle from 1300 years ago? Humans and high elves battled each other under the Tree of Eternity. The immense power finally destroyed the Tree of Eternity. Yes. Lin Li nodded his head. Whatever that Jesco said could be learned from a lot of books in Amrel. The battle that year was like Jesco's individual performance, attaining the title as God of Mages that had never been matched by anyone. He also destroyed the Tree of Eternity that supported the whole race of the High Elves. Many people know that the collapse of the Tree of Eternity was a disaster for the High Elves. The High Elves headed towards complete extinction after losing the Tree of Eternity that gave birth to them. But, I fear that very few people know that the collapse of the Tree of Eternity was also a disaster for the whole of Amrel. The Tree of Eternity not only supported the High Elves, but also maintained the balance of Amrel. F***ck. Tutankhamun just finished speaking, yet Lin Li could not help but spew vulgarities. This was not a joke. Forget about the High Elves since they were already extinct. Being able to support them did not matter, but the point about maintaining the balance of Amrel caused Lin Li to have a shock. This feeling was like a skyscraper with more than 100 floors suddenly had its foundations removed. At this point, Lin Li seemed to have guessed something. After being dazed for a moment, Lin Li did not continue questioning, but just nodded his head and silently listened to Tutankhamun. If you have noticed the history of Amrel, you would definitely discover that the centuries after the Dark Age were days when Amrel was filled with disasters. All sorts of natural disasters emerged in an endless stream. Typhoons, tsunamis, earthquakes, and volcanic eruptions. All sorts of disasters almost wiped out a third of Amrel's population. Because of the Tree of Eternity's collapse? Yes. The collapse of the Tree of Eternity was the source of all the disasters, but this was not the most terrifying part. When Tutankhamun reached this part, he took a short pause, and then continued, the truly terrifying part was that the tears of space started appearing. After all of you return, carefully look through information. Then, you will realize that of the 13 known tiers of space in Amrel, at least 10 formed after the collapse of the Tree of Eternity, and it does not include the Sunset Mountains. What? What you mean is that there is another tear in the Sunset Mountains that can connect to another space? Lin Li swallowed his saliva with difficulty. Maybe the others did not know what Tutankhamun's words meant, but Lin Li understood clearly. It was because Lin Li himself came down from the Sunset Mountains. Before this, he was living in another world. All of a sudden, Lin Li felt that his palms were sweaty, and his heart rate increased a lot. It was because Lin Li felt that the answer he had been searching for was very likely going to appear now. Indeed, there exists a tier of space at the peak of the Sunset Mountains, and it could very likely be the most dangerous in Amril. It's because a lot of prehistoric magical beasts are living on the other end of this tier of space. These prehistoric magical beasts are not just evil-eyed tyrants, but also include minotaurs, hydra, the king of the swamps, as well as the venomous viper. I believe that all of you have heard of the notorious names of these prehistoric magical beasts. If they were allowed to enter Amril, the civilization of the whole Amril would be completely destroyed. Indeed, the thing that's worth celebrating is that this tier of space is not big. It's still not enough for a prehistoric magical beast to pass through. That's why Amril is still safe after 1300 years. Then Jesco, when Lin Li heard this, he could not help but feel curious. Since it was a safe tier of space, why did Jesco still slaughter the Sunset Mountains as beasts? Don't be hasty, let me continue. The first to discover the tier of space was Jesco. When the Tree of Eternity collapsed, Jesco already felt that the balance of this world had been destroyed. Hence, he traveled across Amril, looking for the tiers of space that appeared because of the collapse of the Tree of Eternity. When Jesco arrived at the Sunset Mountains, he discovered the existence of this tier of space almost immediately. There was no helping it. This tier of space was too dangerous. If an accident were to happen, it could almost immediately destroy the civilization in the whole Amril. Hence, Jesco stayed in the Sunset Mountains, and spent almost 10 years on research. After incomparably complicated calculations, Jesco came up with a theory. This tier of space still could not allow prehistoric magical beasts to pass through, but after a certain period of time, the magical tides of Amril could affect the tier of space, causing it to widen. This time, the prehistoric magical beasts would be able to seize the chance. What would happen if the tier of space grew bigger? Hutton instinctively asked, but when his words fell, Hutton already knew that he asked something stupid. Prehistoric magical beasts were not mere cats or dogs. Once they escaped from the tier of space, what good could it do? There was no need to talk about the others. Just a single evil-eye tyrant was enough to cause chaos in the whole breezy plains. Its power was at least at the sanctuary realm. There were only 3 powerhouses that could match up to this power in the breezy plains, and one of them was the Ashen Warlock, a monster that was more of a demon than a human. Furthermore, there wasn't just a single evil-eye tyrant at the other end of the tier of space. Tutankhamun just said that there were a lot of prehistoric magical beasts trapped in that terrifying space. Minotaurs, hydras, which were kings of the swamps, the most venomous vipers, etc. Their numbers could reach up to the thousands. Once they rushed out of the tier of space, all that awaited the whole Felon Kingdom and the world of Amril would just be a cataclysmic disaster. Tutankhamun did not answer Hutton's question, he just looked at the 3 young mages. Which one of you still remembers the time when the 3 magic tides happened in Amril? I do. Naturally, Stephen was rather happy to see his rival, Hutton, doing something stupid. Even an idiot knew that whatever Tutankhamun was doing now was to help those 3 treasures find an heir. Every single word the 3 rivals said could possibly affect to whom these 3 treasures would belong to. The stupider things Hutton said, the lower the chances of him obtaining the treasure. A mage like Jesco would definitely not allow his treasures to go to an idiot. Let's hear you talk. The first magic tide happened in the first decade after the collapse of the Tree of Eternity. During that year, Jesco set up the Supreme Council, and numerous magic councils were being established. With the arrival of the magic tide, large numbers of mages broke through their original realms. The number of archmages reached the highest ever in history. Yet at the same time, the first black current's flow arrived at the Sunset Mountains, and countless magical beasts went on a rampage. In a single night, they destroyed 13 outposts of the Felon Kingdom, and there was a casualty count of tens of thousands of soldiers. From then on, the Sunset Mountains became a true forbidden zone. Even the legendary realm powerhouses did not dare climb the Sunset Mountains during the overflow of the Black Current. Indeed, Tutankhamun nodded his head. That expressionless face of his gave off a rare look of praise. As for the second magic tide, there has not been a single explanation with authority in Amril. Some said that it was the year when the Church of Dawn was established, and some said that it was the year when Jesco became a god. These words received Tutankhamun's praise. Stephen was happy on the inside. This was a good start. As long as he gave himself another push, he would definitely leave a good impression. However, there is another saying in Dark Blade. Oh? This would have to start from the origin of the Dark Blade. The origin of the Dark Blade is actually a secret that was made known to the public. A lot of people know that it is the Darkness Shrine supporting Dark Blade. Stephen spoke while glancing over at Lin Li and Hutton. His gaze had a tinge of arrogance that was hard to hide. So, we know a little of the Darkness Shrines and side stories. No wonder Stephen was so proud. Although the current Darkness Shrine was no longer one of the three great factions in Amril, how could a mere disaster completely obliterate something that had been around for more than 1,300 years? The Darkness Shrine had been keeping a low profile in the recent centuries, so much so that the Brilliant Shrine no longer saw them as a rival, but the Darkness Shrine's true powers were incomparable. It was just that they did not have the same goal as the Supreme Council or Brilliant Shrine, being able to rule Amril. Stephen was the only heir of the Dark Blade, and he had such a terrifying faction backing him up. Of course he had the right to be arrogant. Naturally, Stephen definitely would not know that the true High Priest of the Darkness Shrine was currently waiting at the Crimson Python's nest for a certain rival to give him some pointers. Mr. Tutankhamun, surely you know that the decline of the Darkness Shrine was actually due to a terrifying disaster. During the disaster, the Darkness Shrine lost hundreds of powerhouses level 15 and above, 13 legendary priests, as well as a high priest that had just broken through to the Sanctuary Realm. All of the Darkness Shrine's elites seemed to have been completely lost overnight. After Stephen reached this point, he took in a deep breath. A few years ago, I found the records pertaining to this disaster in the diary of one of my ancestors. According to the memories of that ancestor, the disaster back then was due to the magic tide. It was just that this magic tide was not the same as the first one, bringing prosperity to Amril. This magic tide tore open a tier of space in the Leaden Kingdom. Tens of thousands of magical beasts surged forth from that tier of space and attacked the Darkness Shrine. This was a true disaster. The Darkness Shrine was dyed in blood overnight. Countless elites fell victim to the magical beast's attack. The battle raged on for 7 days and 7 nights before the Darkness Shrine finally killed all of the magical beasts, but they also paid a very heavy price. This definitely sounds interesting. If there is a chance, I would have to ask somebody in the Darkness Shrine. Tutankhamun smiled without showing any opinion, signaling Stephen to continue speaking. As for the third magic tide, it was the most bombastic one. The descendants of the prehistoric magical beast descended upon the Sunset Mountains, causing the whole of Amril to fall into panic. The Supreme Council and the Brilliant Shrine, the strongest factions in Amril, worked together for the first time. Back then, it was Archbishop Rosario and Arbitrator Apophis that led the most elite attack force of the two strongest factions to attack the Sunset Mountains. They even killed all of the prehistoric magical beast descendants before the Black Current, finally stopping this terrifying disaster. Yes. Tutankhamun nodded his head, and then he suddenly changed the topic. Then, can you tell me if there was anything special about the time when these 3 magic tides appeared? Something special? Stephen was dazed when he heard it, but Lin Li, who was at the side, instantly reacted. A magic tide every 400 years? That's right. So the next time, Lin Li calculated silently for a while, before his complexion changed. Wouldn't it be within the next few years? The latest would be 5 years, and the earliest would be 3 years. Lin Li drew in a breath of cold air. Now do you know why I asked for the 3 of you to come over? I have to admit, you humans are a really lucky race. A monster like Jesco has appeared amidst all of you. Jesco had left you a way to deal with it a long 1,300 years ago already. Now, let me tell you what these three treasures are used for. Tutankhamun picked up the Book of Eternity and quickly flipped to the last page. Wha? Lin Li instantly froze. The last page of the Book of Eternity only had an incantation, and this incantation was not too long. There were only 100 runes or so. For a mage, an incantation with a segment of roughly 100 runes did not have any difficulty at all. Most archmages could complete it within 10 seconds. Those that were stronger, such as Lin Li, could even compress to the casting time to within 5 seconds. But seeing this incantation, Lin Li could not help but swallow his saliva. It was because the language for this incantation was actually the ancient language of the dragons and the divine language of the titans. Damn it, Jesco, this monster. Lin Li really had not imagined that Jesco could actually create such a scary incantation. One had to know that this was a magnificent feat that even high elves would not dare to think about attempting. The ancient language of the dragons contained the 8 rule powers, and the divine language of the titans contained the 7 elemental powers. These two languages themselves were the strongest and most mysterious incantations. Every single rune had infinite valiance. Using them to create incantations was simply something only a madman could do. Jesco was indeed a madman. This incantation was left behind by Jesco. Any mage that has the Book of Eternity would be able to use this incantation to seal the Tear of Space. Tutankhamun's words that were casually spoken were like a bomb blasting in Lin Li's ears. As to the methods that Jesco left behind, Lin Li thought of a lot of possibilities, but Lin Li definitely did not imagine that this lunatic would actually use runes to seal the Tear of Space. What did this mean? The Tear of Space was activated by the magic tide, and it also involved the rule power of time and space. To seal this Tear of Space, the magic tide in Anril had to be controlled, thus controlling the rule power of time and space. Yet to do all of this, Jesco actually used a short incantation. Once this incantation was grasped, it also meant that the rule power of time and space had been controlled, thus resonating with the magic tides of Anril and completely understanding all of the secrets of the magic world. Any actions would be able to invoke infinite powers. Once a mage reached such a realm, he would more or less be a living deity. From the looks of it, Jesco did not just leave behind an incantation only. The 3 young mages all knew that this was actually a path towards immortality that was left behind. In an instant, Hutton, Lin Li and Stephen, all 3 young mages, had a look of passion and yearning that was hard to hide on their faces. It was just that after things calmed down, some more doubts appeared in Lin Li's mind. About this, Mr. Tutankhamun, I still don't understand. Why yes? There are many other brilliant mages in Anril, legendary and sanctuary powerhouses. Wouldn't it be easier for them to control this incantation compared to us? I knew you were going to ask this, Tutankhamun smiled. The reason is actually very simple. It's because only a mage that has not formed the magical domain can learn this incantation that Jesco left behind. Once a mage has formed his own magical domain, he would have a lot of achievements in the future. Everything is decided the moment when the magical domain is formed. They gained immense power at that moment, but at the same time lost the chance to be the next Jesco. But as to why I looked for the 3 of you, the reason is actually very simple. It's because the 3 of you are the 3 young men with the best talent among all the mages I know. You have the best chance to meet the requirement for sealing the Tear of Space in 3 to 5 years. The requirements to seal the Tear of Space? Indeed. To use this incantation to seal the Tear of Space requires the abilities of the Sanctuary Realm at the very least. Frack. This time even Lin Li almost fainted from shock, not to mention Hutton and Stephen. To break through to the Sanctuary Realm in 3 to 5 years? Was this some kind of king joke? Even though the 3 young mages present were all filled with talent, none of them would be so arrogant. Was there any difference between sleep-talking and breaking through to the Sanctuary Realm in 3 or 5 years? How many Sanctuary Realm powerhouses were there in total in Anril? They could be clearly counted with just 2 hands. Before experiencing the power of Jesco, these 3 young mages even thought that the sanctuary realm was the limit of the magical powers. But now, Tutankhamun instead told them that if they wanted to seal the tier of space at the Sunset Mountains, they would need to attain the sanctuary realm in 3 or 5 years. Don't be so quick to lose hope, Tutankhamun finished speaking and smiled. It was as though he knew what those 3 young mages were thinking about. He placed down the Book of Eternity and picked up a weird magical crystal. It's not as hard to step into the sanctuary realm as you imagine, because Jesco left behind this magical crystal. Actually, Lin Li had long been staring at that magical crystal while Tutankhamun was speaking. It was because Lin Li always felt that this magical crystal was rather familiar, it was just that he could not remember where he'd seen it before. It wasn't until Tutankhamun placed down the Book of Eternity that Lin Li suddenly remembered that the aura radiating from this magical crystal was very similar to the Evil Eye's magical crystal. It was just that this aura was much stronger and purer. The Evil Eye's magical crystal had always been a bestseller in the black market. A good Evil Eye magical crystal could make countless mages go for it like a flock of ducks. It was because the mental spell proficient Evil Eye had immense mental strength by nature. After the Evil Eye's magical crystal had been processed with special techniques, it could be worn as an accessory. Although this accessory didn't provide any offensive or defensive abilities, when it was worn, it could increase a mage's mental strength. For a mage, what else could be more important than mental strength? Unfortunately, the Evil Eye's magical crystal had always been rare. Its numbers absolutely could not fulfill the wishes of these numerous mages. Thus, the Evil Eye's magical crystal's price had been increasing. According to the Gilded Roses Isera, a single Evil Eye's magical crystal could be worth up to 800,000 gold coins in the market currently. Furthermore, this price was not often followed by purchase. There were a lot of times when it could not be bought even if you had the money. Back at the Endless World, Lin Li had a few of these high-quality Evil Eye's magical crystals, prepared for his mage smurf account all along. A perfect initial mental attribute with the Evil Eye's magical crystal could allow the mage smurf's mental strength to be pushed to a terrifying state. However, when compared to this abnormal magical crystal, those few high-quality Evil Eye's magical crystals did not amount to much. This magical crystal's aura was simply too powerful and pure. If Lin Li was not mistaken, there was an 80 to 90% chance that the magical crystal held in Tutankhamun's hands was the Evil Eye tyrant's magical crystal. Oh my god, thinking about this possibility, Lin Li could not help but swallow his saliva. This was really too terrifying. The Evil Eye tyrant's magical crystal was an item mentioned in myths even at Endless World. Even a person that stood at the peak of the game, Lin Li, had not seen one with his own eyes, not to mention those average players. Lin Li had occasionally seen it mentioned briefly in the libraries. The Evil Eye tyrant's magical crystal had the same effect of raising mental strength. Furthermore, this effect would rise by 100 or even 1,000 times when compared to a normal Evil Eye's magical crystal. If the Evil Eye's magical crystal was a water pipe, then the Evil Eye tyrant's magical crystal was without a doubt a raging river. Even if it was a mage apprentice that had the worst talent, he would definitely become at least a level 19 archmage if he was able to get the Evil Eye tyrant's magical crystal. Furthermore, his mental strength would definitely surpass that of an average archmage. As to why it was just a level 19 archmage, but not a legendary mage, it would be because the legendary realm was no longer decided by mental strength and mana. The legendary realm required the understanding and control of rule power. Without any exaggerations, the Evil Eye tyrant's magical crystal was more valuable than the Book of Eternity for a mage. This time, Lin Li believed that Tutankhamun was not spouting nonsense. If the 3 young talented mages present were to have the Evil Eye tyrant's magical crystal in their hands, they would then not be as far from stepping into the sanctuary realm as they thought. Lin Li swallowed his saliva with difficulty, and looked at Tutankhamun dully. This wouldn't be the Evil Eye tyrant's magical crystal, right? Good judgment. The smile on Tutankhamun's face was very pleased. This is the Evil Eye tyrant's magical crystal. Back then, Jesco set forth for the Sunset Mountains to block the tear of space and obtain this magical crystal. So it really is, in an instant, countless thoughts revolved in Lin Li's mind. The temptation that Tutankhamun took out this time was really too intense, so much so that Lin Li could not hold back anymore. An incantation that pointed to the path of becoming a god and a magical crystal that could amplify mental spells to no end. Not a single mage could resist such temptation. Not Hutton, not Stephen. Likewise, for Lin Li, all of this could no longer be described as benefits. Tutankhamun was right. Whoever were to obtain Jesco's 3 treasures, they really had a chance to become the next Jesco. As for this key, just when the 3 mages were dumbfounded, Tutankhamun took up the remaining key. Jesco left a set of spacetime coordinates in this key. One of you is able to use this spacetime coordinates set to find the last sky castle that the High Elves left behind, and this key is used to open the sky castle. Sky castle. At this point, Lin Li only felt his mind go ballistic. It was actually the key of the 7th sky castle. This time, Lin Li really understood everything. No wonder the High Elves only mobilized 6 sky castles all the way till the end of the battle, while the most destructive and powerful 7th sky castle was not seen during the battle at all. So this was the cause of everything. Activating the 7th sky castle required a single key, and this key was just nice in Jesco's hands. But one thing was weird. Why did Jesco have the sky castle's key? It ought to be known that the 7th sky castle was built by the High Elves after expending countless years and infinite effort. For the High Elves, this 7th sky castle was not only their strongest weapon, but it was also the key to the final step for them to ascend into the domain of gods. The 7 sky castles had always been in the control of Azhara, the queen of the High Elves, ever since they were completed. Although Jesco was known as the god of mages, back in those days when the High Elves were ruling the world, it was not Jesco that was accepted as the strongest mage in Amril. Instead, it was the queen of the High Elves, Azhara. This female High Elf that carried the Moana magic staff when being born under the Tree of Eternity was the strongest in magic in Amril. Jesco was powerful back then, but to steal the key of the sky castle from Azhara was equivalent to sleep-talking. But for Lin Li, how all of this happened was actually not important. It was because Lin Li was very clear that no matter how many secrets or doubts there were in this, he had to get these 3 treasures in his hands. There was no need to mention the Book of Eternity. The last page recorded an incantation that could overturn the whole magic system, and could be described as omnipotent. The magical crystal of the evil eye tyrant was equally important. There was no mage that did not want to have more and stronger mental strength. It was especially so for a monster such as Lin Li that had mental strength in the abnormal range. Once he obtained the evil eye tyrant's magical crystal, it could only be described as redoubling his might. This terrifying strengthening of mental strength, coupled with all of the knowledge found within the Book of Eternity, meant that Lin Li almost had a 100% chance to reach the realm of Jesco. It was not impossible for him to surpass Jesco, either. Furthermore, there was a key that opened up the 7th sky castle here. For an average person like Hutton or Stephen, the key was just an icing on the cake at the very best. Its purpose was significantly lesser than those of the evil eye tyrant's magical crystal and the Book of Eternity. They could, at best, only hope that they were lucky enough and find the sky castle that was lost in space and time one day. But for Lin Li, the purpose of this key was not so simple. It was because the blueprints of the 7th sky castle were currently within the Ring of Endless Storm. Ever since he found the blueprints in the Scar of Death, Lin Li had always been researching their secrets. Numerous parts of High Elf's print had already been translated by him. Even though he was worlds apart from deciphering everything in the blueprints, Lin Li understood a few secrets thoroughly just from the few translated sentences. These secrets might not have much use now, but with the passing of time, Lin Li's strength would grow stronger and stronger. Breaking through to the legendary realm was just round the corner, and even breaking through to the sanctuary realm was no longer impossible. At that point, Lin Li could use the coordinates in the key to enter the turbulent flow of time and space, and find the sky castle that was lost was for 1,300 years, thus gaining control over this unparalleled war machine. A sanctuary master controlling a sky castle would not have any fear even when going face to face against a deity. As for who will obtain these 3 treasures amongst the 3 of you, you 3 would have to decide yourselves. After introducing the history of these 3 treasures of Jesco, Tutankhamun seemed to have let out a sigh of relief, and slowly retreated to the wooden chair after placing down the key in his hand. What should we do? What you need to is actually very simple. Tutankhamun suddenly smiled, but this smile was rather weird. You just need to enter a competition with killing prohibited. Whoever can get the final victory will be able to obtain these 3 treasures. Competition? Yes, a competition that is race with death. After Tutankhamun smiled weirdly, he suddenly stood up from the chair, and then he used a roaring voice to recite an incantation. When the incantation resounded, Lin Li could clearly hear that this was an incantation in the ancient language of dragons. After feeling the ancient aura permeating from the incantations, Lin Li could feel something was wrong. Tutankhamun's competition might not be as safe as what he said. Indeed. Just when the roaring voice settled, the 3 young mages suddenly felt that their surroundings changed. The lustrous forest disappeared with a whoosh, and in its place were fiery flames that blotted out the sky and earth. This was an incomparably weird world. Be it the sky or earth, they seemed to have been lit up by the black flames. Everything within sight was just a world on fire. The thing that made one's blood curdle was that these black flames were not hot at all, but instead were icy cold. Standing at the side felt like ice was being stuck on. Furthermore, Lin Li could clearly feel that an incomparably heavy death aura was permeating these black flames. This death aura did not have the stench of the undead, but it was heavier and purer. When one stood there, it immediately felt like the blood all over the body had stopped flowing. Frack, when the black flames appeared, Lin Li's face immediately turned pale. Icy cold black flames. A death aura that was pure and heavy. If this wasn't the 27th floor of the abyss, then what was it? The 27th floor of the abyss was called the Abyss of Tharlan. In the ancient language of the dragons, Tharlan also meant destruction. This was a world that was filled with darkness and evil. Lin Li was not sure about Amril, but there was a saying in the endless world, the demon lord that ruled the Abyss of Tharlan was actually the dragon of destruction, Azardas. This ancient dragon that controlled the rules of darkness and evil placed one of its shadows into the Abyss of Tharlan. This shadow did not have thoughts or consciousness. It only had a portion of the dragon of destruction's power, and it was loyal to Azarda's will. Azardas used this method to break through the limits of rules in Amril, allowing his shadow to constantly absorb power coming from the abyss while undergoing countless expeditions in the plains of the abyss. Although the Abyss of Tharlan was only the 27th floor of the abyss, the demons within were definitely more terrifying than those from the 30th floor, or even the 35th floor. Back then, Lin Li's hunter that wielded the Stars of Fury received a mission to enter the Abyss of Tharlan after killing Azardas. It was just that this mission did not mention what he had to do after entering the Abyss of Tharlan, and nobody told Lin Li whether the Abyss of Tharlan had any relation with Azardas. Furthermore, Lin Li had too many issues afterward, such as training the mage's survival skills and using the Scroll of Wishes to make a wish, etc. All in all, it was delayed in the long run. When Lin Li was swallowed by the black hole, he never had the time to complete this mission that filled him with doubts. He did not think that he would enter the Abyss of Tharlan in another world after a year or so. Things are going to get spicy. Thinking about this possibility, Lin Li could not help but frown. The Abyss of Tharlan was still that Abyss of Tharlan, but he was no longer the same person. The Lin Li that was wielding the Stars of Fury in Endless World could have been said to be an invincible entity. Even one of the 4 great dragon aspects, Azardas, was slain by him. Although the Abyss of Tharlan was incomparably dangerous, it was not enough to make him flinch. But now, Lin Li lowered his head and looked at the black robe on his body. How was sending a mere level 19 archmage to a place like the Abyss of Tharlan any different from using meat buns to hit dogs? Level 10 minion demons, level 15 demons, and greater demons ranging from level 18 to 20, could all be forgotten. With Lin Li's current abilities, he would be a match even for a greater demon that was level 20. But what if he were to encounter Azarda's shadow? That was the shadow of one of the four great dragon aspects. Even if it were to inherit a fraction of the Dragon of Destruction's powers, it was definitely not something the current Lin Li could resist. Azardas controlled the dark and evil forces of the whole of Amrel. Even if it was a shadow with 10% of his power, it would still be a terrifying existence that was close to Sanctuary Realm. Although Lin Li was now rated as the first person under the Legendary Realm, and he could still go up against a legendary powerhouse like Sendros when he controlled both Holy Light and Gloomy Dark while having a humorous WYRM behind him, this did not mean that he had the power to challenge someone at the peak of the Legendary Realm. Lin Li could rely on the power of Holy Light and Gloomy Dark to close the gap between him and someone at level 20, 21, and even 22, but when the opponent reached level 24, the power of both sides could be said to be miles apart. Holy Light and Gloomy Dark would no longer be able to protect him from the Legendary Realm powers. As for the humorous WYRM, it would just be a laughingstock when facing a powerhouse that was close to the Sanctuary Realm. This is the 27th floor of the Abyss. It is mentioned in many legends in Amrel, and it's also called the Abyss of Tharlan. Now, what the three of you need to do is to think of a way to find a palace located in the deepest depths of the Abyss of Tharlan. After that, use the teleportation portal in the palace to teleport back here. Whoever is able to win this competition will win the 3 treasures that Jesco left behind. Is this the Abyss of Tharlan? Asked Lin Li. Like him, the expressions of the other 2 young mages changed as well. Although they did not know what the Abyss of Tharlan looked like, they knew the place from the many legends of Amrel. That was a place filled with darkness and evil. No one knew how many brutal and devious demons hid within those burning black flames. Fret not, the Abyss of Tharlan now is not the same as in the past. The 2 forces, darkness and evilness, that had been supporting the Abyss of Tharlan had been deteriorating since the Dark Age. Did you not realize that the power of these black flames is not as scary as what was said in those legends? Tutankhamun's words struck Lin Li. He was right. The intensity of those black flames was really not as scary as in the Endless World. In fact, the black flames of the Abyss of Tharlan were as terrifying as the undead plague in the Endless World. They had a corrosive quality that could engulf normal humans in close proximity with their darkness and evilness. The pure black flames before his eyes did not bring any other danger apart from the intense death aura they were emitting. No one would be harmed from standing near it or from putting his hands through it. It seemed that it was true that the Dragon of Destruction in Amrel had fallen. The thought of it gave Lin Li a clearer picture. Now that the Abyss of Tharlan was deteriorating by the day, even if the Dragon of Destruction existed, it would not be as daunting as the invincible lord that resided 35 levels deep into the abyss. When do we start? That was the only question Lin Li asked. Anytime, as Tutankhamun spoke, the surroundings started to distort. What followed was the vanishing of the figure that donned a long black robe. The teleportation portal is just on top of the throne. Wish you luck. That voice reverberated the sky filled by black flames. After watching Tutankhamun disappear, the 3 young mages were not in a hurry to find the palace in the Abyss of Tharlan. They stood in their spots agreeably, and each had a gaze filled with vigilance and inquiry as they glanced at the other 2 buddies. The 3 young men were the top young mages in the entire Felon Kingdom. Firstly, the speed of Lin Li's progress was unprecedented. He rose from a mage apprentice to a legendary mage in less than 2 years. The 2 other young men had grown up in the Dark Blade and the Manhwa family, respectively. They were both heirs of the 2 huge forces. How could the 3 of them not understand the meaning behind this situation? The Abyss of Tharlan was located 27 levels deep into the abyss. Even if there was no shadow of the Dragon of Destruction there, it was not a place for ordinary men to challenge. Not to exaggerate, the danger level of the Abyss of Tharlan was not lower than that of the Black Current in the Sunset Mountains. Not to mention the great demons above level 20, there were hundreds and thousands of minion demons and normal demons in that abyss. Even if the 3 young mages were talented, they would not be any better if they had to battle with those demons. Even Lin Li, the most powerful of the 3, did not have the confidence to find that palace by himself. The three young mages were all very clear that the only way to go far in the abyss of Tharlan was to collaborate with one another. If they were to split up, it would be heart-stirring in every step they were to take alone. Lin Li did not have full confidence to battle hundreds of demons. How different could Hutton and Stephen be? On the other hand, the three mages were rivals. If one of them took one step ahead of the rest, it would mean a smaller chance for the other two to acquire the three relics. It would not matter if they were other items, but Jesco's relics had tremendous importance that no mages would offer to others. Even Jesco once said, "I will not let God hinder my pursuit of the truth of magic." Hence, the three young mages stood there in silence. No one offered to collaborate. That was a very hilarious scene. The first difficulty that the three top mages of the entire Felon Kingdom, or even Amril, faced was not a frightening demon, but an issue that would not be a problem to ordinary people. "Hey, you two," the heir of the Manhwa family finally broke the silence with an awkward cough. Just when he wanted to suggest a temporary collaboration, Hutton noticed tremors in the black flames around them. What followed was a booming noise mixed with roars and growls. At the start, it sounded distant. However, the sound grew exponentially while causing the ground to shake. It was as though there were thousands of soldiers and millions of horses charging towards them. "What the hell?" Stephen gasped in shock. Everyone knew the dangers in the abyss of Tharlan. However, none of the three mages had expected Lady Luck to bring such a massive number of demons to them the very moment they set foot into the territory of the abyss of Tharlan. The booming noise shook the ground. A fool would have known that a troop of demons would be hundreds and thousands in strength. What did hundreds and thousands of demons entail? It would be easy if they were all minion demons. If they were demons or greater demons, the three mages would have no place to put their tears. Lin Li took a quick glance at the situation. The black flames that filled the place gave them no place to hide. "Let's fly up," said Lin Li in a low voice after a moment of hesitation. "All right." That was Stephen. Everyone knew that was the only option when this man did not voice out any opposition to Lin Li's ideas. The battle with the hundreds and thousands of demons would be similar to digging their own graves. Archmages did not have the unlimited ability to cast spells. They would be immediately drowned in the tide of demon troops once they took a break from the recitation of spells. The levitation spell was the only way to get to safety. Apart from the more unusual species, ordinary demons had no ability to fly. These demons would only develop a pair of wings and know how to fly when they reached level 18. The three men cast the levitation spell and swerved up 100 meters into the sky almost at the same time. The troop of demons was like tide waters when viewed from 100 meters up in the sky. "Holy sh**t, Lin Li gasped as he broke out in a cold sweat. That was a troop of Aztecs, one of the notorious demons that resided 20 levels into the abyss. They were birthed from fire and lived near the mouth of active volcanoes. They could move through blazing fire, bathe in lava, and had natural resistance to all fire element spells. The explosion of the powerful pyroblast on their body would be like a tickle to their skin. The minion demons of Aztec type were easier to deal with. They had not learned any spells, and did not have high intelligence. Without the orders from a greater demon, they could only attack instinctively. Their hot lava-like bodies were their only weapons. They would pounce on their enemies when they felt threatened, killing either themselves or their enemies. The Aztecs would acquire some fire element spells such as the Flaming Storm and Hellfire once they reached level 15. Although the impact of these spells was not as powerful, it would be another story if hundreds of Aztecs were to cast those spells together. That was not the scariest part. Aztecs above level 15 had a spell called Live Bomb. It was a spell that could terrify even greater demons. However, the target of this spell was not an enemy, but rather themselves. Aztecs above level 15 could turn their body into a bomb and cause an explosion that could rival pyroblast. It could break apart any type of magic defense and magic shields. Lin Li might not be able to withstand more than 5 live bombs even with his elemental shield. There were at least 100 level 15 Aztecs on the ground, and around 10 of them had a pair of red wings. That meant the 10 demons were at least level 18. Phew, at least I'm in the air, Lin Li commented as he broke out in a cold sweat. If he had cast the levitation spell any later, he would have been caught up by the horrendous number of Aztecs, which would tear his body to shreds. Lin Li knew his safety would not last long, for he saw a few Aztecs, with red wings, flying up from the ground. Hey, you two. Let's escape, Lin Li made a very wise decision as he rubbed his nose. It was not that the 3 young mages did not have the ability to defeat the 10 level 18 Aztecs, but that there was no need to do so. To Lin Li, there was a great risk to take part in the battle. It would be no laughing matter if the level 18 Aztecs cast the live bomb. Not to mention Stephen and Hutton, even Lin Li had no confidence that his magic shield would be of help then. It was fortunate that demons like Aztecs had a natural weakness. Even if they were in level 18, their slow flying speed would make it a challenge for them to catch up with the young mages. While Lin Li was the only person in Amril who could use the levitation spell like the power of flight, Stephen and Hutton were not to be trifled with as well. They were the disciples of mentors in the legendary realm and heirs groomed by the 2 large forces. The levitation spell they cast was not what a common mage could imagine. When the group of Aztecs had just discovered the mages in the sky, the 3 black figures had already sped off like lightning and covered a few hundred meters immediately. Their speed was faster than the time necessary to use a live bomb or cast spells like the flaming storm. The several hundred Aztecs had to watch the 3 humans flying above their heads. Apart from the 10 demon leaders with red wings, the Aztecs were left helpless. Let's hide somewhere in front, Lin Li suggested nervously when he saw 10 Aztecs flying menacingly after them. Although they wouldn't be able to get to them within a short amount of time, Lin Li knew their mana would not suffice when they were exerting their mental strength to fly at a faster speed. It would not be worth it to drain all their mana when they were competing with the stamina of the Aztecs. We need to think of a way to shrug these demons on our tail off. The Abyss world had 99 levels, and there was a complete world on every level. All of the Abyss world was also known as the Endless Abyss. Although the Abyss of Tharlan was just one of the 99 levels, it was very spacious. Apart from the black flames that could be seen everywhere, it had mountains, rivers, and forests. It was not very different from an actual world. Despite flying for at least 10 minutes, the 3 young mages were still unable to break away from the Aztecs. Lin Li also realized that the mana of Hutton and Stephen was starting to dwindle. It was not unusual for long-distance flights to be consuming a huge amount of mana. Lin Li was already surprised that the 2 of them could endure so long. After all, not all mages had the ability to cast 10 pyroblast instantaneously. However, that did not matter. They would be able to shrug that bunch of Aztecs off very quickly. Because Lin Li saw a forest ahead of them with the warlock's eyes. The forest was 2 to 3 kilometers away. At their speed, they would be able to reach it in 3 minutes. Although Aztecs that were above level 18 were troublesome, the forest was still better than normal plains. Once they entered the forest that had complex topography and a huge bunch of trees and grasses, Lin Li was certain that not only would the Aztecs not be able to transform into live bomb, it would also turn them into the hares that would submit to them. The 3 men reached the region above the forest very quickly. Lin Li slowed down and asked, "Hey, should we go pick up a few dead hares from the land?" "Dead hares?" Stephen and Hutton looked at Lin Li skeptically. How could he think of playing with hares when the flames of the Aztecs were going to burn their butts? "That's right, stupid dead hares." Lin Li plunged into the thick forest without giving further explanation. Hutton followed in his wake right after Lin Li landed on the ground. Although Hutton was unsure what was going on with President Felix, consistent interactions with him gave Hutton confidence that President Felix had different brain structure from normal humans. His seemingly baffling actions would always have stunning results, causing the people who did not agree with him to feel regret. Hutton did not dare to disagree with Lin Li. He did not want to regret it. Hence, Hutton stood behind Lin Li obediently. Unlike Hutton, Stephen was less agreeable. Unfortunately, there was no opportunity to protest when the 2 others had already entered the forest. What could he do other than follow behind them? He was not Jesco. He would not have the ability to fight with a group of Aztecs above level 18. I shall let you guys off this time, Stephen muttered under his breath as he glanced at that figure clad in a black robe a distance away. After some hesitation, he reduced his mana usage and made his way towards the ground slowly. Hey, President Felix, what are you doing? Hutton asked when he saw that mysterious President Felix pouring a bottle of star sand on the ground. I brought too much star sand with me, and it hindered my flying speed. I want to pour some of it away for fun, said Lin Li in a patronizing tone. Felix, President Felix really likes to crack jokes. The only thing Hutton could do was to laugh awkwardly at the outright patronization. He had no other choice. Lin Li was not a man he could trifle with. He had no idea where this Felix came from, but was really stunned by what Felix did in the Blackstone Mountains. He was a butcher who got rid of a huge bunch of bandits. He could summon dozens of death knights any time he wished to. With his humorous WYRM, anybody who were to trigger his wrath would never be able to leave the abyss of Tharlan alive. Furthermore, the fella had a great relationship with Sendros. Who was Sendros? He was a legendary realm mage of at least level 20. As one of the high priests of the Darkness Shrine, which once had the same influence as the Brilliance Shrine or the Supreme Council. Even though a century had passed, the Darkness Shrine still had greater power than the Manhwa family. Hutton was one of the few who was aware of the true abilities of the Darkness Shrine. Wasn't Darkness Shrine behind the Dark Blade, the force competing with the Manhwa family for the last several hundred years? After a few interactions, Hutton was certain that the freakishly young President Felix was really not someone to challenge. Being a man with a lot of secrets, he might even be scarier than Sendros. It's actually nothing much. I'm just setting a small trap. Lin Li grew embarrassed when he saw how awkward Hutton was. While continuing to pour the star sand, Lin Li started to explain it to him. I knew it. President Felix must have thought of how to deal with the Aztecs, said Hutton. The explanation given by Lin Li was a positive signal to Hutton that Lin Li had intentions to ease the relationship with him. Although it was not a good relationship to start with, to Hutton, it was pleasurable enough if that fella did not treat him as an enemy. It meant that he did not have to worry when Felix was going to take revenge on him. Just when Hutton wanted to take the chance to patch things up for his wrongs in instructing the Sire bandits to sneak attack, he saw Stephen approaching them from the sky. The expression of that young mage from the Dark Blade became uneasy when he saw the star sand on the ground. God damn it. So you lured us into this forest to watch you draw circles? If you are not interested, I don't mind if you leave this place any time. Lin Li said as he pursed his lips, without looking at Stephen. He did not take Stephen's attitude to heart, as he was sure that Stephen would not have the intelligence necessary to learn the maze mageweth and mageweth array. Lin Li might be the only person who knew that the maze mageweth was what gave him the confidence to suggest they pick up dead hares. Of course, Lin Li did not have the time to explain it to Stephen. The maze mageweth was a high-level mageweth array that involved mental and spiritual strength. It was a challenging mageweth array that not all high-level inscriptors had the confidence to establish. Furthermore, Lin Li intended to construct a mageweth array with 3 maze mageweths. This increased the difficulty by many levels. Who would have the ability to multitask by giving Stephen an explanation? Whom could he put the blame on if he were to commit any mistakes? However, the difficult mageweth array was the best solution to deal with the Aztecs. The maze mageweth was a special existence in the category of high-level mageweths. Although it was not life-threatening, it could create illusions for the living beings within its boundaries. A mageweth array that was made of 3 maze mageweths would increase the strength of the illusions. Lin Li presumed that 3 maze mageweths were sufficient to affect the Aztecs that had innate resistance to mental spells. Since one could easily crash into trees with his eyes wide open, Lin Li felt that the many trees in the forest helped to construct an environment easy for them to deal with the Aztecs. Yet, it was not exactly foolproof. He still had to add another maze mageweth and use the mageweth array to create different types of illusions. Alright. Mage Hutton, let's find a place to rest, Lin Li said as he patted the dust off his long robe. He had put a level 10 magical crystal on the source of mana carefully, and completed the last magic node. Oh, yes. Mage Steven, do you want to take a rest too? You can also take the chance to have a look at how I draw circles. Humph. Steven snorted without looking at Lin Li. It seems that Mage Steven has no interest in drawing circles. Mage Hutton, shall we go take a break there? Lin Li commented grinningly after glancing at Steven. After that, Lin Li and Hutton found a seat at a dry spot. They took the chance to replenish their mana that had been drained from the long flight. Although their long-distance flight consumed a lot of mana, recovery was a matter of just a few minutes for mages like Lin Li and Hutton. They recovered most of their mana before they could finish drinking a sack of water. At this time, Steven, who had been standing a distance away, looked rather awkward. He thought Felik was the only man who had gone crazy, but did not expect Hutton to be infected as well. Steven could not bring himself to approach the two of them with his ego, but he seemed rather foolish, standing still at his spot. In that moment, Steven was really at a loss for what to do. However, his awkwardness did not last long. Right after Lin Li and Hutton finished their water, the sky started to rain fire. It's here! Hutton exclaimed as he grabbed the magic staff by his side, and started reciting a spell. At that instant, a translucent blue glow filled the entire forest. The forest became chilly, and there was now a protective layer over Hutton and Lin Li. At the same time, there were countless flames tearing through the sky. A level 18 Aztec was only one step from being a greater demon. Its innate fire element spell would have already evolved to the final stage. If 10 of them were to cast a spell together, it would be as powerful as a legendary level spell. Every flame harbored massive fire magic element. The moment they came into contact with the blue glow, they emitted a blinding beam of light. At that instant, the magical elements within the forest looked as if they were boiling. Wind blew madly, and the blazing flames danced wildly. Colorful magic symbols fluttered like rainbow butterflies around the men. This portrayed the vast accumulation of abilities by the Manhwa family. The blue beam of light cast by Hutton was obviously not part of his magic energy. Instead, it came from powerful magical equipment. Lin Li could see that the blue shield remained still amidst the legendary level fire rain. Apart from occasional small ripples, it looked as though it was not facing any magic attack. Although Lin Li knew that he could be safe if he were to cast the elemental shield, he was certain that it would not be as effortless as Hutton's method. He thought that the defense mechanism of the blue shield would be at the legendary level. It is true that no snakes in the breezy plains are easy to challenge. While Lin Li was analyzing the situation, his pair of despicable eyes stole a glance at the other snake a distance away from them. Hee, the other snake seems to be out of luck. Lin Li expected it. Although Steven could withstand the fire rain, this snake from the dark blade looked especially miserable if one were to compare him with the effortless Hutton. Steven used the same necklace again. However, the effect of the necklace was much weaker than before. When they were trying to unlock the elemental iron crate the other time, Steven's elemental psi necklace could construct 7 layers of elemental shields instantaneously. It managed to block the millions of magic arrows then. However, there were only 3 elemental shields this time. They were dull in color, and were totally unlike the firm and radiant ones in the prehistoric age. After all, it was an incomplete elemental psi. It did not withstand the fire rain for long. The first droplet of fire rain landed on Steven within 10 seconds before the second, third, and fourth droplet landed on him. Despite his robe being good magical equipment, it caught fire from the scorching hot rain. Shit. Steven's mind blanked out when he saw the droplets of fire. Come here quickly. A frantic voice called out. That was Hutton. He was trying his best to expand the coverage of the blue shield. Steven regained his focus after hearing Hutton. He endured the pain from his shoulders and cast a hastening spell on himself. With the boost from the spell, Steven scurried towards the blue shield with all the fire sparks and thick smog. Phew, Steven sighed in relief after he had gotten himself to safety. That was a terrifying moment. If Hutton had called out to him 1 or 2 seconds late, he would have either burned to his death or become paralyzed from the fire rain. That being said, just when Stephen was secretly gloating, he heard a voice by his ear. "Mage Stephen, I see that you have a unique fetish." "What fetish?" asked Stephen subconsciously. He was still in a daze, and could not comprehend Lin Li's words. "Your fetish of exposing your body," Lin Li replied grinningly as he looked at Stephen's back wickedly. Stephen's sudden realization made him reach with his hands behind his back. He felt a cold gust of wind. No, it was not just his back. After taking a close look, Stephen realized that his robe had been burnt really badly by the fire rain. Apart from that piece covering his chest, he was in a mess. This caused Stephen to wish for a hole to hide in. How could a high-ranking archmage, and the only heir of the Dark Blade, be as miserable as a beggar? Moreover, he had displayed this broken side of his to the irritable Felic. His ego had now dropped into the other side of the endless ocean. Don't be shy. Mage Stephen, me and Hutton are very open-minded. Although we do not really approve of your fetish, we would not discriminate you because of it, Lin Li said hypocritically. He unleashed his bitchy side by aggravating the situation. Stephen nearly spat blood. His embarrassment and rage was visible on his face that was covered by thick ash. "If you'd known better, you would have joined me in the investigation of the drawing of circles," comforted Lin Li regretfully while snickering wildly inside. It was because that was a hole he'd dug for Stephen. As compared to the other demons that roamed in the abyss, the Aztecs were actually very low in rank. Although they could reach level 20 to become a greater demon, they were never known for their prowess in magic. The reason why it was challenging to deal with them was their natural resistance to fire element spells as well as their ability to transform into live bombs to launch suicide attacks against their enemies. In terms of magic attributes, they might not be as strong as some other level 15 demons. The natural disadvantage left them with their visual and olfactory senses when they chased after their enemies. Unlike other demons, the Aztecs could not use magic to locate their opponents. The Aztecs would only launch their attack when they saw the three humans enter the forest. When Lin Li was in the Endless World, he took on a mission to enter the Abyss of Tharlan alone. Although he did not really enter the Abyss of Tharlan in the end, he managed to gather a lot of information about the place. He was very clear on the attributes of the Aztecs. Hence, after establishing the maze Manhwas earlier, he did not stay at their original spot for too long. Instead, he found a hideout to watch the show begin. That was the pitfall. With Stephen's personality, how would he accept Lin Li's invitation to draw circles together? To sum up, it was a deliberate act of revenge that was of an extremely bad intention and extremely serious nature. This was Lin Li's personality. His classic vindictive nature would help him remember any trivial offense. Although he could be very smiley on normal days, he would repay it 100 times more when he meet the right opportunity. This type of revenge might not claim lives, but it would definitely make someone extremely miserable. The miserable appearance of Stephen delighted Lin Li. He gazed at the eccentric fashion style Stephen boasted, and estimated the timing the fire rain would last. Aztecs that were below level 20 could only cast level 15 fire rain. Only when they surpassed level 20 and became a greater demon would they be able to turn fire rain into the powerful firestorm. Fire rain would normally last for 3 to 10 seconds. The most important part was the depletion of mana after the Aztecs cast the fire rain. However, 3 to 5 seconds would suffice for a mage like Lin Li. 3, 2, 1. The continuous fire rain came to a stop immediately. What followed was a rushed recitation. Before Stephen and Hutton could react, a frost dragon gun had shot into the air. Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.